I heard about the travel grant through one of my colleagues who serves with me in a number of platforms, AfOx Vhumani. He is a research fellow of the Oxford Institute of Aging, and he knew that I was working on adolescent and sexual reproductive health, and he also had some experience with the work that George is doing here at the Institute, and he said, look, there's a bit of intersection with what George is doing, and it might be a very interesting interchange, and particularly my work on demographic dividend and the youth bulge, which essentially would affect the African continent, particularly South Africa is one of the countries in the next 40-50 years, because the current youth and adolescents who are between 15 and 25, 40 years time they're over 60. So this bulge will be also a bulge in 40 years time. So that was the very clear intersection, I think, in my work with the work that the Institute is doing. So I thought, why don't I try?
So the actual application process for me personally, but also working with other colleagues here at the Institute, was quite frankly very straightforward. We're lucky at the Institute because we have a dedicated research facilitator who is able to assist not just me, but also in this instance Vhumani, so sort of a go-between between the network's procedures for determining where they will give the scholarships and us having to provide the information. So it was very smooth, very smooth. In terms of this particular collaboration that we have, I think for me, one of the most fascinating aspects of it is to discover that you, Vhumani, you're working with issues which are replicated in different parts of the world in different ways, and you are very interested in the church and the church space and how that can be utilized to promote adolescent sexual and reproductive health and behaviors, and that is being replicated maybe in different spaces with the church in different forms and different levels of influence, but that is being replicated. I see it to a great extent in Latin America where I work, and I think it's just so rewarding to have worked in one area to then come to another area, in this case South Africa, and see the same issues and having to try and find ways which will work, because what might work in Latin America may not work in South Africa, and vice versa. And I think that is fascinating, bringing this research into that arena, and ultimately wanting to influence all of these different players in whatever way is possible to optimize, as you were saying, the sexual and reproductive health behaviors.
In terms of our exchanges, if I reflect on some of the snippets, I think, and the experiences on the work that is being done in Latin America, for instance, if I think of the incident that you shared about the Catholic priest who kind of begged off, I think, because of family planning issues and so forth, and then it begs the question, I think, also in the nature of the work that I'm doing, because the issue that I'm wrestling with is the issue of religious health assets, that churches are an important asset. What are those assets? What is the nature of those assets? How should those assets be understood? Part of those assets, it's an example of what you shared. It's actually a withdrawal of an asset, I think, from the matrix of sexual reproductive health that was withdrawn, and then people find themselves fumbling and in a crisis and so forth. So how to understand, how to leverage those kind of assets and utilize them for more effective and optimize the interventions of churches as well. And I think also within that context as well, how to locate the churches as community spaces, not just for its inward people. How does it work along the entire level chains, from individual young people to parents who are part of the church and also the community, right up to policy level?
Yeah.
How are they playing the game or their
Exactly.
role? How do these perceived assets, whether real or perceived, really seesaw across the various levels and so forth? So it's quite interesting and exciting for me to probe those various issues as well, because what you shared is precisely a good example of an asset in terms of intangible assets that was withdrawn.
And I think as well, you know, what we really have to emphasize is that it really is, in terms of this sort of exchange, it's a two-way process. It's a two-way learning process that I think we're both learning from the different contexts in which we are doing our work. You particularly, obviously, in South Africa, and me to some extent in sub-Saharan Africa, but predominantly in Latin America. And you know, I think when we have our interaction, I think both of us very often think, oh gosh, I hadn't thought of that, when the other one is talking. And so it's a two-way process. And if I may, I think you just touched upon it there, that there are all of these different players at different levels. And of course we start with government policy and come all the way down to adolescents in their community, in their families. And while governments may be implementing well-meaning policies which should have an impact, once it filters down through all of these different levels and all of the different players, including the church and the family and the schools, have had an impact, then what plays out on the ground may be very different from what
you find is the institutions that are present in the community oftentimes is a school and a church. Often these are the most common and prevalent, I think, community institutions, and this is where people gather. At least in a school, it's just young people. In a church, that's where you find people coming together as a group. Hence my interest to understand how they work, I think, across the levels, and so forth. And also in South Africa, churches are important power brokers at policy level.
Oh gosh, yes.
Exactly. So it's very important to understand, I mean, that power is an asset as well that can be unleashed for optimizing, I think, interventions.